I see a lot of hypervigilant women now, and they're like, my life is perfect. I love my husband. My kids are great. Like, I have nothing that should make my nervous system feel this way. And their hormones are straight. But then you're like, well, what was, early years like? And you find out that they never had safety as children. So now they're scanning the room for the threat all the time. And that's exhausting.
Yes. Yeah. And if they're parents, they're even more hypervigilant because they're aware of that for their children.
Yes.
Welcome to Fated to Fabulous, the podcast for women who know that midlife is not the end. It's the beginning of something bold. I'm Kim Lovely, and I'm here with Vicki Kirby. We're here to talk to you about health, hormones, confidence, and joy. Midlife isn't about fading away. It's about stepping into your power and shining brighter than ever. Let's get into it.
Hello, ladies.
Hi, friends.
Welcome back to Fated to Fabulous. We're so happy to have you here. And we are so excited today. We're going to cover a topic that we've touched upon and talked about through many of our previous podcasts. And that is EMDR and managing your nervous system and trauma in midlife and the importance of it. So we have an expert on the subject who is spectacular. Her name is Sarah Benoit, and she is joining us here today to talk all about it. Let you introduce yourself because you'll do, a better job than I might.
Well, thank you both so much for having me.
So very welcome. Thank you for coming.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I'm so excited.
Great.
I've been a licensed psychotherapist for more than 20 years, and trauma is my specialty. EMDR is, in my opinion, the best modality, especially because we don't think of it, but there's a lot of times we don't have words. And I'm sure both of you know, we hold everything in our body.
Yeah.
And to have a modality that can tap into that without having the words is really powerful. So,
can I ask you to define EMDR just for our listeners that might not be familiar with that terminology? Thank you.
It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And what it does, so the way we're taught is, for example, like I would be doing this and you would be following me with your eyes. You wouldn't be moving your head. But if I did that all day long, my arm would fall off. So there's this little contraption and there's a tapper. So it's like a little paddle that you hold one in each hand. And what it does is it's bilaterally stimulating your brain. And with trauma, we get stuck. And if you think of, like, say, for example, you go for a walk. You feel better because you're utilizing both sides of your body, which utilizes both sides of your brain. If you play an instrument, it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. And what EMDR does is it allows you to reprocess memories so that they don't feel like you're actually still living in it. And it moves you through it, so it basically unsticks you, so to speak.
I love
Fantastic.
that. Knowing that we're both working with women in midlife, and was so excited to hear about a program that she just created specifically for women in this season of life. So I sounds amazing. So I would love for you to talk about that.
Sure. It actually launches on March 20th, and it's a 90-day program. It's online, and eventually, like right now, everything's going to be live, but it's going to be an open enrollment kind of thing. So you do this at your own pace. But one of the things I found that was really missing, and let me kind of back up a step as to why I even did this.
Yeah.
My own menopause journey has been crazy. I ignored a lot. I have psoriatic arthritis, so I assumed a lot was my arthritis.
Sure.
But it was weird. I was like, this is different. And I wasn't getting answers. Mm-hmm. It didn't matter who I was talking to. I'd get, oh, you're fine, or your labs are fine.
Normal.
Yes,
word.
Normal. Right.
So it's in your head.
It's in your right. It's in your head.
Yeah.
And so I kind of thought, I have some experience with plant medicine and herbs. So I said, okay, I'm going to try what I know. Yeah. But then I was like, this isn't working. So I met up with a naturopath who she really got me on the right path. But the most important thing was she educated me. Mm-hmm. And she explained to me what was happening. And I'm thinking, okay, this did not have to be this hard.
Yes.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. And I also, from the women that I see in my practice, I understand anxiety. I understand depression. I understand trauma. But when you go through perimenopause and menopause, it brings it all to a different level. I could intellectually understand what these women are going through, but it wasn't until I started to physically and emotionally go through it. I'm like, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
And I had friends that were very open about talking about it. I had friends that were like, not even going to go there. And I said, okay, if I can make this easier for women, I need to do this. So the big thing that, I start the program by saying we have to reduce the kind of the buzzing of our nervous system. We're not going to make any progress if we're always wired and in the stratosphere. So that's really the first step, is calming our nervous system down. Then I get into, if you think about, it's all about integration. And that's why I call it the integrated menopause care model. We don't just learn something and say, okay, good. We have to practice it and really integrate it every day. So then I start to think about, okay, once we've calmed down, what are we looking at? I encourage women there's some tools that I have around looking at your identity, looking at your roles, because what have you done up until this point? Maybe you've been a mother, maybe you've been a career person, you've been a wife, a friend, a daughter, a sister, all that good stuff. And now with menopause and perimenopause, you're kind of feel more exposed and raw, and what serves you, what doesn't serve you, because things are different. Maybe you're caring for your parents. Maybe maybe you want to change your career. You're an empty nester. I mean, there's all sorts of things that go in there. So one of the things I'm really happy about is I find, or at least I have found, when people talk about menopause and perimenopause, they talk about the hot flashes. They talk about the mood changes. They talk about the menobelly, which is all real. But I don't think we spend enough time on the identity.
Big time.
And there's a grieving process that goes with that no one wants to talk about, because quite frankly, we aren't good with grief. We're not good with loss. And so that's really that I think is what makes my program different, is I really focus on that, in that this is a way to free up some space so that you can really become this new version of yourself, and you have a really stable plan going forward. And I certainly don't put myself out there as like, I'm not the hormone expert. Yes, that's definitely a part of it, and that's a piece of the curriculum. But I think it's not a one size fits all. And I know that from my own process, because it took me 1.5 years to embrace HRT. Yeah.
And then once you did,
Because we were scared to death about it for
Yes,
20 years. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did you ask yourself after the 1.5 years, once you got started, like, okay,
Yes.
fear?
Well, right. And I come from a family, my mom has had breast cancer 3 times.
Yeah.
And so it was always the black box warning.
Sure.
You can't do this. You
Yes.
can't do this. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do what I can not to have cancer. And then again, the time I've spent with my naturopath, she's like, okay, we're going to break this down. And there are studies that are showing that you're okay, and it's bioidentical. And there's all that, I was like, oh yeah, I wish I knew this 10 years ago.
Well, and you see this in your practice. Accessing that care in someone who understands is really difficult.
It is.
I mean, even for myself as a clinician who called my patients in 2002 and said, oh, whoops, this is dangerous. When I was, doing the unlearning and relearning, I still, even functioning in this role, was like still fighting my own worries about what I'd been programmed to believe for 20 years, and not wanting to do harm and wanting to be safe. So, yeah, you can see why somebody who doesn't have the background and the medical knowledge would really struggle.
And even having kind of that, the psychotherapist knowledge, it was a lot easier to sit with my clients and be like, okay, this is what's happening. It's harder when you're looking in the mirror.
Yes.
You know, and I could come up with every excuse and one off like, oh, this is normal, or this is just weird. This is a weird week. This is a tough month. My anxieties I went through the worst anxiety of my life a few years ago, and I blamed my puppy.
Oh, that's right.
Because, I mean.
You didn't blame perimenopause or menopause.
not at all. And I went to the doctor saying that. I said, this is all my puppy. He's a tough puppy. And I don't want to, and I was, you talk about like trying to be in control. I had him on a regimen, me on a regimen. If I didn't vacuum that day, my whole day was off. And it wasn't until, and I wrote a book about him, and it wasn't until editing the book when I went, oh my God, I was in the worst flare of my menopausal journey. And I was blaming it on him.
Yep.
And I'll tell you, and the anxiety went right down that leash, and he was so confused. And it's fine now, but it's that hindsight where it was like, if this were someone coming into my office, I could have nailed that. But for myself, I'm like, no, like I've handled this before. What's my problem? Buck up. Come on. It's that
Isn't it amazing how we will talk to ourselves?
You're bringing up that issue. I didn't realize that the symptoms of anxiety that one might have prior to perimenopause, like in your menopausal year or your menstrual years, those symptoms can be very different. So I experienced that. I had this period of like just very dysregulated. And I called a friend of mine who's a psychotherapist, and she said, it's menopause anxiety. And I said to her, this is not anxiety. I know what that is. And she goes, you do not know what this is. It is very different than anxiety in your 30s. And no one ever told me that. I did not know. I thought I was losing my mind. It was just the body's experience was so much different that you can't wrap your head around it.
Right.
It's crazy.
And I think we see, I thought I was in burnout. I think I shared that with you. I was like, oh, I'm in burnout from the pandemic. And now I look back and all these like symptoms and things that were going on and body changes. And I'm like, duh. But who knew, right? You know what you know. When I see women in midlife, I don't think there's many patients that see me that don't walk out with me recommending some form of therapy. Period. But I definitely sound like a broken record commercial for EMDR. and I try to explain it to women like this. I typically say, especially our generation, Gen X, we were taught to compartmentalize and stuff.
Yes.
And we did that really successfully all these years as our hormones were doing what they needed to do, and we had all the roles and the things we needed to do. And then all of a sudden, it was like, these little packages are coming out of the closet, floating up, and there is no longer any way to stuff them.
Right. Yes.
And you can take every hormone under the sun, but if you don't take care of that, then you're constantly... your nervous system is reacting to stuff that doesn't deserve to have a place at the table today.
Yes.
And so reprocessing that doesn't instantly heal your life, but it makes it so that you're upset because groceries are expensive and not because you think the guy at the grocery store is mad at you because you were taught to people please everyone. Like it's pretty interesting, the shift in the dynamic that happens with EMDR. What does it look like? Can you explain like how that process works and what a woman could expect coming in for that?
Yeah, the very first thing is, after kind of doing the normal intake and the biopsychosocial and all that, is we work on what's called a calm place. And the whole reason for doing that is because as you start to get into processing your memories, you might feel really dysregulated. And you might need to I need to take a time out and just really calm down. But what I love about it is that's something you can just take out into the real world. And you can use that as you're in the grocery store, wanting to rip someone's head off.
I can't afford beef.
So that's the very first thing is you establish a calm place, you practice that calm place. And then we do some distress tolerance to prove it works. And
cool.
Yeah. And then what we do is we say, what's the problem that you want to work on? So what's, maybe it's, say if you were in a car accident, well, I can't drive anymore. I have a hard time with that. Or, if you've gotten, even if you've experienced something that's kind of what someone else might think is mildly traumatic, say you move. Well, yeah, I've moved, but now I have no friends and I have no connections. I have no community. So we define the problem and then we say, okay, what is the overall negative cognition you have about yourself around this? And all that means is really broad brush. Maybe you think I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable, I'm not strong, I'm not capable. And then we say, okay, what's the positive cognition? And it's maybe I'm safe, I'm in control, I'm intelligent, I'm capable, I'm lovable. And then I would say to you, what's the first time you felt that negative cognition? And what's the worst time you felt that negative cognition? And then we fill in all the memories in between. The next step is we say, what are your present day triggers? What are the things that happen in everyday life that send you right back there? And then we say, then we outline what's the future template? Meaning, so if you're in this situation, how do you see yourself navigating this in the future?
Right.
It's going to be a lot different. So then after all that's done, then we sit down and we start with either the first or the worst memory, and then we just process all those memories. And I always warn people, you may have nightmares, because people worry, the biggest thing with doing any kind of trauma work or unpacking is I'm not going to be able to function. I'm not going to be able to stop crying.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel that again.
Yeah.
And the thing is with EMDR, like talk therapy, of course, I think it's great. I do it. But EMDR, your brain's working way faster than your mouth. So you're going to get through this really, really fast. And so people will say, well, how long? I can't tell you how long.
Right.
I have worked with people one session, and I've worked with people for years. Because what happens is a lot of times you're going to find, I say that EMDR opens windows and doors in your brain. And so you're going to start maybe remembering, oh, I haven't thought about that in 20 years, or I forgot that happened, or, okay, so I don't really know if something happened, but I have this really weird knot in my chest or in my lower back. And so then we can go through and work with that information.
Can you talk a little? So one of the things, we know traumas and needing to be reprocessed, also effective as well, right, for old programming in that same, figuring out where old reoccurring.
Yes.
And one of the things that we see in women that is really challenging is the struggle with body image and memories and things like that around it, which I'm sure you hear all the time. I personally will share, I went back to do some fine tuning in my EMDR, which sometimes you find you need to do.
Yeah.
And she said, what do you want to do today? And I'm like, I feel like we've checked the boxes, but let's dive into body image, the stuff that still comes up for me all these stupid years later.
And has her partner,
oh my gosh,
I know
Kim,
for a fact they come up.
And then Kim, who's
becomes a trigger
been
for me,
coaching me for a million years. and so, I said, let's do this session. And it was, I'll explain, from my experience in it was, again, go back to the earliest memory of where you felt. And I just literally walked through, and it was just like a glimpse of different periods of life where I felt judged for my body or someone said something negative or any of those pieces. And at the end, and if this isn't me, this isn't the psychologist telling me, this is what you should be doing now. My brain is automatically doing this, which is so cool. And at the end, I'm kind of there as me today. Yep. And I just had this messaging come through that was, you've already done a really good job on this part. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm still I'm still saying I'm stuck in my own head about my body image. But then it was giving me evidence to the contrary of how far I've come in that department. But I did just go for 5 days to go visit friend, and she's like America's Next Top Model, and literally, and so I was like, oh gosh, here I am, white as a ghost. I'm going out. We're going to be hanging out in our bathing suits, and I can tell you there was an enormous shift in
awesome.
how I carried myself, in my clothing choices, in hanging out at the pool, and not having recurring voices that don't deserve to be there. So it's so, even for that, how do you work with women on that?
Yeah. It's interesting that you're asking that, because I think even personally, that's been my toughest, hurdle. And that was also, even for the program that I've just created, that was really important to me, because that's that identity/grief part. Because I think that this sounds terrible, but there's this expectation, at least in Gen X. I think the younger generations have certainly managed this better. Yeah. We grew up with the airbrushed magazine models, and, just if you think of, when we were in high school, everyone wore tight jeans, and, so there's a woman's body, it was there was worth attached to your appearance. And I said this to someone yesterday because we were talking about just this subject. I said, there's nothing sexy about midlife.
There may be some would disagree.
Men
would disagree.
Right? Okay, in one way, but I think there's a lot of other things. Like,
yes.
Like I sometimes smell like onions, and you know what I mean? Like all of a sudden, there's some dryness. Yes. Yeah, so it's a mixed bag.
But I think it's a woman-generated thing.
Absolutely.
I think,
100%.
Yes.
Right? Like,
and that's what
we
I meant.
have we've created this.
Yes, we have this standard and we have this expectation. And that's part of the work. And I think even when I'm approaching it with women in my practice, it's, I think it's so much like we have to dig. And even around, we're so much more than what it's not a shell that we live in, but it's what we're,
skin suit.
This vessel. Yeah, the skin suit. So I try to really focus on, okay, we have to dig because you're more than that, and it's much like I was asked the other day, because this is, to me, is similar to the weight question. Someone asked me, how do I approach weight? And I said, it's not about the weight. It's about, are we nourishing our body? Because that shifts. Are we nourishing our soul? Are we nourishing our spirit? Are we nourishing our relationships? And that might sound kind of like, okay, you're not addressing the question, Sarah. You're not addressing the problem. But if we're so focused on the appearance or how we look in that bathing suit, we're not present. And we're not really living our life, and we're not enjoying it. And I'm guilty of that. But to your point, I do think it gets easier. The more acceptance and the more that you kind of realize, I really have been doing all this work all along. It's like, why am I not giving? And this is part of my new program too. We have to honor where we've been because it got us to where we are.
Yes.
100%. Yes. I love that.
Did I answer your question?
You absolutely did. That was fantastic. What about changing relationships? So Kim and I talk a ton about kind of like this season of life and like navigating those changed relationships with your kids, with your partner, with your parents. Like, how do you tackle that, or what do you see as challenges for women?
I see a lot of guilt.
Yeah.
A ton of guilt. I find that women are having a hard time. They want to stand in their power in these relationships, but they have the coulda, shoulda, wouldas. And, I'm obligated to be doing this, that, or the other thing. And I reassure them, like, relationships are going to shift. And I see it starting with women in their 30s, because that's when they start to be, I think, more discriminate about, like, I don't want this drama, or I don't want this, thing, whatever it is. And then when the circle starts to get smaller, women panic. And I'm like, it's not about it's that old adage, it's quality, it's not quantity. I'd rather have two people that I have my back, versus I have 100 that don't even know what my, last name is.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a whole episode on friendships, navigating changed friendships.
Yeah. It was interesting because I was having this conversation with a friend of ours at coffee the other day, and realizing that you may not necessarily want to be included in the activities of a particular group because they don't sort of meld with how you're feeling and how you're doing your life. But not being included triggers a whole bunch of junk.
Yes.
Right? And so I was even thinking about, for myself, that would be a really good
EMDR.
Yes, because it shows up in different, you've seen it show up.
Kim and I are going to start taking notes.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a session on.
Because it's not just the not being included. What does the not being included mean?
Yes.
Does it, trigger the sense of, well, I'm not good enough or popular enough or worthy enough? And then that goes all the way back through your, all the years back to your first memories of children figuring out how to make groups and stuff. So to me, sometimes it's interesting that the episode that you're experiencing seems like superficial or shallow, but it reflects a much deeper, bigger issue.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's funny because Michael will say, well, why is this bothering you so much? This shouldn't bother you. I'm like,
that's helpful.
I get it. And I agree with you. My brain is saying, yes, you're correct. but it does.
Right.
Right? So,
Yeah, I've been known to say that I feel like this is almost like a reverse or a second puberty.
yes.
And it brings us back to
Yes.
middle school.
Yes.
Right? So the intellectual adult brain says, this shouldn't bother me. This isn't important. But the emotional inner child is screaming, saying, I'm here and I don't like this and I don't understand this, or I was left out of this and it's not okay. And it brings all of that stuff
Interesting,
back up.
right?
Yeah.
See?
Fascinating.
Yeah, I know, right? I found
Here,
it.
Kim,
Yeah, you know what? I would say the only disagreements we've ever had is when it triggered that in me. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
Feeling like,
Yes.
yes, right?
Yep.
It's weird.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
It's fascinating. We're fascinating beings.
Fascinating.
Question about how people can, well, first of all, what's the name of your book? That's so cool.
Oh, it's called Life Lessons of a Doberman Pinscher.
Oh my gosh.
Can people find Amazon or?
I haven't launched it yet. So
okay.
that is coming soon. Everything's ready to go. So I just have to make it happen.
Life
Of a Doberman. Life Lessons of a Doberman Pinscher.
of a Doberman Pinscher.
Oh, boy.
Can I ask one more question before we wrap up? So we brought up the word trauma a few
Yes.
times. Can we kind of unpack that a little bit? Like, as I hear the word, what do they call them? Little trauma, big trauma,
Yeah.
little T,
Yeah,
big
that
T,
would be
whatever.
really helpful.
Can you?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think
Absolutely.
sometimes people may not think, well, I didn't, I wasn't, whatever.
If they weren't in a war, they don't think that they
right,
had trauma.
right.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Big trauma with capital T that's what people think of. They think of war. They think of, homicide, mudslides. Yes, sexual violence for sure.
Yeah.
But little T traumas are things like moving or empty nest or, I'm going to retire. I'm excited, but then what am I going to do with my life? And that is actually, I think, more complicated because, to your point, I didn't experience trauma. When they hear trauma, they get scared. They think, oh, I must have, something terrible must have happened and I'm broken. No, it's just that this is something that was difficult for you. And maybe there's some residual things or it's tough to navigate. And so that I think is the biggest difference. Like trauma can be, I'm having a hard time with this. Now, are you going to take out a billboard that says, I'm going through trauma? Right. But internally, it can feel huge. And I think that's the distinction. And I remember going through trauma training very early, and I used to get into spirited debates about, well, we're only going to do this modality with if you're a victim of homicide or sexual assault. I'm like, yeah, but for the kid, as an example, who moves in the middle of middle school and now has no friends, that's traumatic for them.
Absolutely.
Or even just being feral kids like we were. There was a lot, like, it's amazing we all made it through some of our childhoods.
Yep.
But I see a lot of hypervigilant women now, and they're like, my life is perfect. I love my husband. My kids are great. Like, I have nothing that should make my nervous system feel this way. And their hormones are straight. But then you're like, well, what was, early years like? And you find out that they never had safety as children. So now they're scanning the room for the threat all the time. And that's exhausting.
Yes. And if they're parents, they're even more hypervigilant because they're aware of that for their children.
Yes.
Yes. So when we like Vicki said, we recommend therapy all the time. As an observer of the women, or even maybe someone who's out there observing a friend or whatever, what would be things that would be like a little, not a red flag or whatever, but, how would you coach a friend to go and seek care for it? Like, how would you, because I've been in that situation before where, I'm working with someone and I don't feel like I can help them with the nutrition part or the life coaching part until they actually deal with the bigger problem, which is their trauma. So how do you now? Yeah.
That's a tough one.
It is a tough one.
I think everyone's different. It's not kind of a blanket statement. I mean, the first thing is, especially if I knew the person, I'd be thinking, okay, what's your support system look like? What resources do you have? I think resources are tough because you've got some people that have a lot of access and some that they're kind of in a hole for, they're too afraid to reach out. They don't know what to ask for. I guess I would check in, even if I knew them or didn't know them. What's the biggest thing you're kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? What's your biggest challenge or struggle? Yeah. What's your biggest struggle? And that would give me, an idea of like what direction to point them in.
Can I tell you what I do, and then you can correct me or not?
Yes.
I will use Vicky's words, actually. You are worthy of going and asking the questions. And if it's not something that you want to pursue, so be it. But I think every human is worthy of going and asking the questions, right? So that's kind of how I do it. I leave it with them, but I also try to put it to a place of love, care, kindness, and compassion.
Yeah. Yes.
Is that?
No, that's great.
And would that approach work with a friend or a family member as well? Would you say, I think you're worthy of asking the questions?
I love the word worthy.
Yeah.
So yes. And it's interesting as you were saying that, because I think the word that popped into my head, which I am a huge advocate for, is the self-advocacy piece. So that ties in with the worthiness of asking the questions, because we need information. And, I may not know what path is best for you specifically, because I think we also have to figure that out for ourselves. I mean, I can give you 15 recommendations and you might go, yeah, none of that resonates with me. But I love the worthiness, because that's what it comes down to. It's very similar to what I say to all the people that I work with, really, is like, it has to start in here and it can't be external. It has to come from in here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love that.
Great. Thank you.
You're
I was
welcome.
like, as you were talking about it, I'm like, I wonder if I'm using the wrong words
No,
or whatever.
no, it's
because it's
perfect.
hard. Like, you don't want to step into someone else's, because they're a client, right? So you don't want to like overstep.
Right.
So, sorry, Vicky.
No, you're fine. How can people find you and your program?
Okay, so that, if they go on to Instagram, my handle is at scbenoit720. And there's a link in my bio that goes to the actual page where you can learn more about the program. You can sign up there. You can reach out to me and I can do a video with you. It's one of these things where, this is going to sound I don't know how this is going to sound. I want women who are committed to themselves.
Yep.
It's not, this isn't just if you don't do the work, you're going to be fine. It's you have to be willing to put the work in. Yeah. And that's why I really like to talk to people before. I mean, if you want to just sign up, great, just sign up. But I think we can talk to see, what is it that I want to tailor this to what you're looking for and what your needs are. That's the whole thing, is it's customized.
And do the women have to be, or anybody, do they have to be in New Hampshire, or they can be worldwide?
No. Or they can be U.S. and Canada.
Perfect.
And one of the things I want to stress to people too, like right now, yes, everything is live, but so say you can't make a coaching call, then you watch the recording, because we're all busy. Our time is valuable. We're juggling 50 million different things. But just because you can't necessarily make it in person doesn't mean, oh crap, now what? I've missed out. The links are there and you'll be able to access everything.
Excellent. Okay. I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for also being so committed to women in midlife, because we need an army.
Yes.
We need an army.
And thank you on behalf of our audience of helping them to sort of understand what EMDR is, how it could be helpful. Is it something that they want to look into as well? So thank you for that, because I think, as you said, we don't know what we don't know until we're told.
Yeah. Or we're in the middle of it.
Or in the middle of it. Exactly. Yes. Okay.
Thank you both.
You are very welcome.
Thank you so
All
much.
right, thanks. Thanks for spending time with Vicky and I today on Fated to Fabulous, where midlife is just the beginning of your boldest chapter yet. If you got something out of today's episode, we'd love it if you'd share it with a friend and leave a review. Hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're looking for more support, inspiration, or sisterhood, come join us at fatedtofabulous.biz, because you were never meant to do midlife alone. Until next time, stay fabulous.